The rain fell softly against the windows of Dr. Alan Summers' office, a gentle percussion that should have been calming, but for Naomi Carter, each drop echoed like a countdown. She sat across from the polished mahogany desk, her hands clasped tightly together, as if prayer alone could alter what she was about to hear. Beside her, her husband, Ryan Whitfield, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of clean-cut charm that had once stolen her breath, shifted restlessly in his chair. His fingers had been twined with hers a moment ago, but now they rested apart, distant on the leather armrest, as though the space between them had grown into a canyon. Dr. Summers, kind-eyed yet somber, folded his hands, his voice carrying the careful cadence of a man who had delivered difficult truths too many times. "Naomi," he began, "we've run every test, and the results are clear. The scarring from your surgery 5 years ago is severe. I'm afraid natural conception will be extremely difficult, possibly impossible." The words, though spoken gently, sliced through her heart like glass. Naomi had braced herself for this possibility. She had replayed this very moment in restless dreams and midnight prayers, but nothing prepared her for hearing it aloud. Her breath caught the walls tilting slightly, and she looked instinctively to Ryan, hoping for his strength, his warmth, the steadfast hand that had always guided her through storms. But his expression was unreadable. His sea-green eyes, usually so full of light and affection, now seemed to focus on a horizon far away from her. He didn't squeeze her hand. He didn't even look at her. Naomi forced herself to speak, though her voice trembled. Are, are there options?" Dr. Summers nodded softly. "There are possibilities. In vitro fertilization, though the success rates would be low. Adoption, surrogacy. Each path comes with its own challenges, but there is hope." "We'll think about it," Ryan interrupted quickly. His voice clipped his jaw, tightening as he stood before Naomi could gather her thoughts. "Thank you, doctor." The drive home was cloaked in silence, heavy and suffocating. Atlanta's streets stretched before them, blurred by the rain. Naomi stared out the window, watching children splash in puddles near apartment stoops, mothers tugging little hands back from the street. Once she and Ryan had spoken about a life just like that. A bright brick house with a wraparound porch, a golden retriever in the yard, the sound of children's laughter filling the evenings. They had circled neighborhoods together, pointing out homes they'd one day fill with memories. Now those dreams felt like cruel jokes dangling just beyond her reach. "Ryan," she whispered, turning toward him as they pulled into the driveway of their colonial-style home. "We need to talk about this." "Not now, Naomi." His eyes stayed forward, the keys rattling in the ignition as he shut off the engine. "I need time to process." She swallowed hard, the words lodging like thorns in her throat. She could see it in his eyes already, the retreat and the disappointment, the subtle, aching withdrawal of a man who had once held her heart like something sacred, but now seemed to find it burdened by cracks he could not bear. Inside the house was warm, the faint scent of her favorite jasmine candle still lingering. But the comfort it once gave her now felt hollow. She stood in the foyer while Ryan disappeared into his study, the door clicking shut behind him. Alone, Naomi let her shoulders sag, her palms pressing against the cool wall as though it could hold her up. She had always believed love was enough, that when the storms came, the two of them together would withstand any flood. But love, she was beginning to realize, was not always stronger than disappointment, not always more powerful than the crushing expectations of others. Later that evening, as she sat at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of her teacup, the sharp click of heels echoed against the hardwood floor. Evelyn Whitfield entered, her silver hair swept into an elegant twist, her suit tailored to perfection. She looked as though she'd stepped out of a society magazine, polished and untouchable. "Ryan told me," she announced, her tone clipped, dismissing pleasantries. "Told you?" What Naomi asked, though she already knew. "About your condition." Evelyn's pale blue eyes glittered with cold superiority. "Such a shame. The Whitfield name has always been carried forward with pride. And you? Well, you seem unable to fulfill even the most basic duty of a wife." The words landed like blows. Naomi bit down hard on her trembling lip, fighting the wave of humiliation. She had endured years of Evelyn's subtle digs when, "Will you give us grandchildren, Naomi?" But this was different. This was cruelty sharpened and deliberate. "That isn't fair," Naomi managed, her voice breaking but firm. "I didn't choose this." "Didn't you?" Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. "Ryan deserves a legacy, a real wife, a fertile wife, not a woman broken before her time." The slap Naomi hadn't expected came swift and merciless. Evelyn's hand cracked across her cheek, sending a sting of heat and shame flooding her face. Naomi's breath caught her hand, instinctively rising to the mark. From the study door, Ryan appeared. He froze in the doorway, his eyes darting between the two women. Naomi waited, praying he would rush to her, defend her, tell his mother she had gone too far. But he said nothing, nothing at all. Naomi's heart broke not from Evelyn's slap, but from Ryan's silence. She knew in that moment the life she had dreamed with him was slipping away like sand through her fingers. And yet deep within the shattered pieces of her heart, a quiet ember sparked a whisper that this was not the end but the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine. Dear friend, if Naomi's story has already touched your heart, don't let it end here. Your likes, your comments, your support keep stories like hers alive. Share your thoughts below. What would you do in Naomi's place? And don't forget to follow so you'll be here when her journey continues. Because trust me, the storm has only just begun. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Whitfield home, scattering across polished floors and the ivory walls Naomi had once adored. The golden warmth should have felt like hope, but to Naomi it carried no comfort. The air in the house was thick, tense, almost watchful. She moved slowly through the kitchen, her cheeks still tender from the sting of Evelyn's hand the night before. Ryan had already left for the office without a word. No kiss, no touch, not even a glance back. The silence of his departure told her everything she was expected to endure the storm alone. Naomi placed her hand against the cool marble of the countertop, grounding herself as she tried to steady the rush of emotions tearing through her chest. She had given 4 years of her life to Ryan. 4 years of building a home together, of imagining nurseries that never came to be, of whispered promises under star-soaked skies. And now it seemed all of it was vanishing, devoured by Evelyn's cruel ambition and Ryan's growing indifference. The sharp click of heels echoed once more, a sound Naomi was beginning to dread. Evelyn entered pristine as always, her presence a storm cloaked in elegance. She carried with her the faint scent of roses, but it did nothing to soften the chill in her demeanor. "You're still here," Evelyn said flatly, her pale eyes sweeping the room before landing on Naomi. "I assumed you might have packed by now." Naomi's spine stiffened. "This is my home too." A cold smile curved Evelyn's lips. "For now, but let's not pretend it will be for long." Naomi drew in a steadying breath. "I love your son. I will fight for this marriage." Evelyn's laughter was delicate but edged with venom. "Love. My dear, love doesn't raise heirs. Love doesn't carry forward the Whitfield name. You may care for Ryan, but you cannot give him what he truly needs." She stepped closer, lowering her voice until Naomi could feel the heat of her words against her skin. "And that makes you nothing more than a placeholder." The words struck harder than the slap had. Naomi's chest tightened, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if Evelyn could hear it. She wanted to scream, to shatter the icy calm of the older woman with the truth of her own worth. But she forced her voice steady. "You think you know what Ryan needs, but you don't see him as I do. He doesn't want a legacy more than he wants love. He doesn't need heirs, he needs a partner." For the first time, Evelyn's expression faltered, the faintest crack appearing in her mask of superiority. But it lasted only a breath. She straightened her shoulders, her voice sharper than a blade. "You're naive, Naomi. Ryan has always belonged to this family, to its expectations, its duties. He will not defy me for you. He never has." Naomi felt her throat tighten. Deep down, she knew Evelyn spoke the truth. Ryan had never stood up to his mother, not once in all their years together. He loved Naomi, yes, but always within the boundaries Evelyn had set. And last night, his silence in the face of her cruelty had told Naomi the final truth she had feared to admit. When forced to choose, he would not choose her. "I will not allow you to ruin him." Evelyn continued, her voice trembling now with passion that masqueraded as righteousness. He will not waste his life shackled to a woman who cannot give him children. Naomi's tears burned hot, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of this woman who thrived on her pain. She lifted her chin, meeting Evelyn's cold gaze with the steady defiance of a woman who, though broken, would not be shattered. Perhaps, Naomi said softly, her voice edged with steel, it is not me ruining him. Perhaps it is you. The silence that followed was electric, as though the very walls of the house held their breath. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into a thin line. And in that moment, Naomi saw not grace, not elegance, but a bitter woman whose own power was built on fear and control. Before Evelyn could respond, the front door opened. Ryan stepped inside, his expression weary, his tie loosened as though the day had already defeated him. His gaze flicked briefly from his mother to his wife, and Naomi saw the hesitation in his eyes, the hesitation that spoke louder than words. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone weary but cautious. "Your wife," Evelyn said smoothly, her composure instantly restored, was explaining why she believes she deserves to remain in this house, despite being unable to fulfill her most basic duty. Naomi's breath caught her eyes, searching Ryan's face. Would he defend her? Would he stand even once between her and his mother's cruelty? But his jaw only worked in silence, the war within him evident, yet unresolved. "Ryan," Naomi whispered, her voice trembling, "tell her to leave." He looked between them, torn, but the words that finally fell from his lips were not the ones Naomi had prayed for. "Mom's just worried about our future," he said softly. The final crack splintered through Naomi's heart. Not worried about her, not about them, about the future Evelyn dictated, the one Naomi would never be allowed to belong to. She turned from them both, her vision blurred, her body trembling. In that instant, she understood. The home, the marriage, the love she had poured her soul into, none of it could survive Evelyn's poison. And Ryan, the man she had trusted with her heart, had chosen to let her drown. As Evelyn's satisfied silence filled the room, Naomi pressed a hand over her heart, feeling it ache, as though it might break entirely. Yet beneath the pain, a fragile spark of resolve flickered to life. She would endure this. She would not vanish into the quiet ruin Evelyn wished for her. One day, she told herself, one day Evelyn would see the woman she had underestimated and regret it. That night, the rain returned. It tapped against the bedroom windows in soft, persistent rhythm, as though nature itself mourned for what was breaking inside the Whitfield home. Naomi lay curled on her side of the bed, eyes open, hands pressed against her abdomen, as if cradling the children her body refused to give her. The duvet felt too heavy, the silence too loud, and beside her, the mattress was cold. Ryan hadn't come to bed. She listened to the sound of his footsteps in the hallway below, the quiet thud of his study door closing. It had become routine, his slow retreat from their shared life. Meals eaten apart, words reduced to logistics. The love they had once wrapped themselves in like sunlight now felt like an old photograph, beautiful but distant. Naomi rose from the bed. Her silk robe whispered against her skin as she moved down the hall past the photos, lining the walls, snapshots of laughter vacations, stolen kisses under golden light. Each frame was a ghost now, a silent witness to a love unraveling thread by thread. She paused outside his study, heart pounding, then knocked gently. "It's open," Ryan called. His voice was tired, flat. She pushed the door open and stepped into the room where everything was still in place. His desk, meticulously organized architectural sketches, pinned neatly on the wall. He looked up from his laptop, and for a moment their eyes met. There had been a time when that look alone could dissolve her anger, draw her close, remind her why they'd fought so hard to find each other in the first place. But now there was only distance. "We need to talk," Naomi said quietly. Ryan leaned back in his chair. "About what?" Her heart twisted. "About us, about everything." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Naomi, I'm exhausted. We can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "Pretending it's just going to work itself out if we avoid it long enough." His silence was heavy, and it forced her to keep going. "I know what the doctor said. I know what it means for you, for us. But there are other ways to have a family adoption surrogacy. We can still have the life we dreamed of." Ryan's jaw tightened. It wouldn't be the same. But it would still be ours, she pleaded. Ryan, I haven't given up on us. Have you? His eyes met hers, and for the first time there was no shield, only sorrow. I don't know, he admitted. I don't know if I can live with never having what I always imagined. Naomi felt the breath catch in her lungs. You mean a child, or a child that's biologically yours? He hesitated too long. The question had been buried for months, living in the corners of their silence. And now it stood between them, naked and brutal. I just thought it would be different, he said. I thought we'd be parents by now. I thought I'd have a son to teach how to build things, a daughter who'd climb on my shoulders. I thought by 36, I'd have more than an empty house and disappointment. Naomi's voice came out soft but resolute. You're not the only one grieving. Ryan nodded. I know, but the difference is, you can live with this. I can't. The words struck like a blow. She stood still, waiting for him to take them back, to say it was frustration talking, that he didn't mean it. But his silence confirmed everything. And then softly, like the earth shifting beneath a house built on unsteady ground, he said, I think we need space. Time to figure out what we really want. Naomi took a step back. Her hands, still trembling, clutched the sash of her robe. You mean you need time to decide whether you still want me? I'm not trying to hurt you, he said. But you are, she whispered. Every day you say nothing. Every night you sleep down here. Every time you let her voice broke, hurt me without saying a word. Ryan stood, reaching for her as if to offer some shallow comfort. But Naomi stepped back. Don't, she said, her voice fragile but firm. Don't touch me if you're halfway out the door. She turned and walked out, the silk of her robe trailing behind her like the last thread of a life unraveling. The following morning, Ryan was gone before she woke. No note, no message. Only the emptiness beside her, the bed made too neatly, the mirror above the dresser that reflected a woman she barely recognized anymore. Later that day, a courier arrived with an envelope, legal documents, a separation agreement. Naomi read each page in silence, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. It was real now. Not just distance, not just silence, but paper, ink, signatures. A week passed, then two. The house grew quieter. Naomi stopped cooking dinner. She stopped lighting candles. She spent more time walking alone through the garden, where the jasmine had begun to bloom in defiance of the chill in the air. Then came the message from Evelyn. It arrived handwritten on expensive stationery, delivered with the cold precision of a formal business transaction. Naomi, for the sake of your dignity, I suggest you vacate the house within the month. Ryan has agreed to provide generous support during the transition. It is best for all involved that this be done with discretion and grace. E. Whitfield. Naomi stood at the window, the letter trembling in her hands. Outside, the rain had returned, but she no longer flinched at its sound. She folded the letter, placed it neatly on the mantel, and walked upstairs. She packed in silence, no tears, no pleas. By the time she stood in the foyer with her suitcase at her side, the house felt foreign, like a museum of a life she no longer belonged to. She looked once more at the portrait above the fireplace, a photo from their wedding day. Naomi in lace laughing, Ryan holding her close beneath a storm of petals. They had looked so in love, so invincible. Now as the front door clicked shut behind her, Naomi didn't feel invincible. She felt like a woman who had lost everything. And yet beneath the grief something stirred, a flicker of something ancient and quiet. Not rage, not even resolve. It was survival. And Naomi Carter had no intention of disappearing. The studio apartment was small, too small for the dreams Naomi Carter once carried, but it was hers. Its walls were bare except for the soft glow of lamplight, and the air smelled faintly of the jasmine candle she'd carried with her from the Whitfield house, the one thing Evelyn's disdain could not strip away. 2 months had passed since Naomi had walked out of the life she had built with Ryan. 2 months of silence where there had once been laughter, of nights that stretched endlessly long without the warmth of a husband's embrace. She had grown used to the loneliness, or at least learned how to wear it like a second skin. But lately something inside her felt different. She moved slower in the mornings, her body heavy with a weariness that sleep could not cure. Food turned her stomach. And then there were the quiet, inexplicable tears that came without warning, as though her soul itself was mourning in ways her mind had not yet understood. It was on a gray Sunday afternoon when the truth began to press itself against her heart. Naomi sat curled on the narrow sofa, a book forgotten in her lap, one hand resting absently against her abdomen. The thought came unbidden, sharp enough to make her breath hitch. Could it be? She tried to dismiss it, tried to bury it beneath reason. After all, Dr. Summers had been clear. She could not conceive, not naturally, not without a miracle. But her heart whispered what her mind refused to say aloud. That evening, Naomi found herself in the pharmacy aisle standing before a wall of pregnancy tests. Rows of bright boxes stared back at her like merciless judges promising answers she both longed for and feared. Her hands trembled as she chose the most expensive one, as though paying more might somehow buy her a different fate. Back in the apartment, the minutes crawled. She set the test on the bathroom counter, pacing the small space with her arms wrapped around herself. She thought of Ryan, the last night they had shared a bed before the silence became final. She had believed then it was a step back toward each other, a fragile attempt to mend what was fraying. She hadn't known it was goodbye. When the timer chimed softly, she forced herself to look. 2 lines, clear, undeniable. Naomi sank to her knees, the test clattering from her hand onto the tile. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Pregnant. The word rang in her mind like a bell, startling and miraculous. After years of despair, after all the cruel words, after the divorce papers that had branded her as less than a wife, she was carrying life. Not just one life, she would later learn, but 2. She pressed her palm against her stomach, whispering into the quiet, "It's you. It's really you." The irony was sharp enough to taste. The very thing Ryan and Evelyn had cast her aside for, the thing that had branded her as broken, now grew inside her. A secret no one could deny. At first came joy, wild and consuming, but then as quickly came fear. How could she do this alone? How could she provide, protect, become mother and father in a world that had already told her she was not enough? For the first time since she'd left the Whitfield home, Naomi picked up her phone and dialed Ryan's number. The ring seemed endless. On the 4th chime, it went to voicemail. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice fragile. "It's Naomi. Please call me back. It's important." She hung up her hands, trembling. The next day she tried again, and again the next. On the 4th day, a woman answered. Her voice was crisp, professional, and utterly unfamiliar. "Hello?" Naomi swallowed. I'm looking for Ryan Whitfield." A pause, then muffled voices. When the woman returned, her tone had cooled. "Mr. Whitfield isn't available. Please don't call again. Please just tell him it's Naomi. I need to." The line went dead. Naomi stared at the phone, disbelief colliding with the raw ache of betrayal. He had blocked her, shut her out completely, as though their years together had meant nothing, as though the life inside her wasn't also his. By the end of the week, desperation drove her to Evelyn's doorstep. The Whitfield estate rose before her, all gleaming white columns and manicured hedges, a monument to control and appearances. Naomi's hands trembled as she knocked, her heart pounding like a drum. Evelyn opened the door herself, wrapped in a silk blouse and pearls, as though she had been expecting tea rather than confrontation. Her expression cooled the air. "What are you doing here?" Naomi's voice shook. "I need to see Ryan. He's moved on, as he should." Evelyn's gaze was sharp, her lips curving with disdain. Naomi drew a breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hovered between them like lightning ready to strike. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, calculation flashing in her gaze. "Pregnant." She tilted her head, her voice deceptively calm. "And who is the father?" Naomi's heart clenched. "Ryan." This was before the divorce. Evelyn's smile was razor thin. "How convenient, and how very desperate of you." "It's the truth," Naomi whispered, her tears threatening. "He deserves to know." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice dropping into a venomous whisper. "Listen to me carefully. Ryan does not want you. He does not want your problem. If you try to force your way back into his life with this fantasy, I will destroy you. In court and society, in every way, a woman like you can be destroyed." Naomi's blood ran cold, but she forced herself not to look away. "You wouldn't," she breathed. "Try me," Evelyn said, her smile pure malice. Naomi stood frozen, staring into eyes that reflected only cruelty. She realized then that Evelyn meant every word, and Ryan's silent, absent complicit would do nothing to stop her. When Naomi finally turned away, her legs felt like glass. She drove to the lake on the city's edge, to the spot where she and Ryan had once watched the sun dissolve into the horizon, hands entwined with promises they thought unbreakable. She sat on the bench, the water churning gray beneath the heavy sky, and pressed both hands to her still flat belly. "It's just us now," she whispered. "But that's enough. I will be enough." And in that vow, Naomi felt the first stirring of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The life she had lost was gone forever. But the life growing inside her, two tiny heartbeats, though she didn't know it yet, would become her reason to rise again. Naomi Carter awoke to the distant clang of pipes in her modest Atlanta apartment, the winter morning spilling pale light across the faded wallpaper. She sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting gently on the curve of her abdomen. Only a few weeks had passed since she'd discovered she was carrying life, yet the knowledge had already changed the rhythm of her every breath. The fear was still there, waiting at the edges of her mind like a predator. Fear of raising a child alone, fear of failure, fear that Evelyn's threats might one day come true. But beneath the fear, something stronger had begun to rise, a fierce, unyielding determination. That morning, as she stood before the cracked mirror above the bathroom sink, Naomi studied the reflection staring back. Her dark eyes, ringed with weariness, now burned with a quiet fire. The woman looking back was not the same Naomi who had once cowered under Evelyn Whitfield's cruelty. She was someone new, forged in the flames of heartbreak. She pressed a palm against her belly, whispering softly, "I promise you, both of you, that I will never let anyone break us again." It was only days later, at her first prenatal appointment, that the doctor smiled and turned the ultrasound screen toward her. "Congratulations, Ms. Carter," he said gently. "You're carrying twins." Her breath caught tears spilling before she could stop them. Two tiny flickers, two heartbeats pulsing like whispers of hope against the void. Twins. Not one miracle, but two. Naomi left the clinic with a new resolve thrumming in her veins. She could no longer afford to live in survival's shadow. Her children deserved more than scraps of a broken dream. They deserved a mother who could fight for them, a mother strong enough to build a world where they would never doubt their worth. That very night, she cleared the cluttered desk in her apartment and spread out the brochures she had quietly gathered. Law schools, night programs, paths that once had seemed impossible. She remembered the conversation with her college professor years earlier, the one who had told her she had a sharp mind, a gift for argument, and a rare empathy that could move hearts. At the time, she had dismissed it, choosing instead the safe path, the supportive wife. Now, with the echo of Evelyn's venom still lingering in her ears, Naomi realized the truth: she had been living small to fit inside the box someone else had drawn for her. No more. The next morning, she called the admissions office at Emory University School of Law. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "I'd like information on your evening program," she said. When she ended the call, she stood at the window overlooking the city, her heart racing. Atlanta stretched out before her, vast and unrelenting. Somewhere in its crowded streets, her future was waiting, not given, not inherited, but forged with her own hands. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, applications, and planning. Naomi took a temporary job at a local legal aid office, answering phones and filing casework by day, while poring over law school materials by night. She battled morning sickness with determination, sipping ginger tea between phone calls and stealing moments of rest on her lunch break. It wasn't easy. Some days exhaustion pressed so heavily on her that she feared she would collapse before evening came. But whenever she wavered, she thought of the two heartbeats pulsing within her. They were counting on her. And that thought gave her strength no amount of fatigue could steal. As her belly grew, so did her circle of support. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly widow from the apartment across the hall, began dropping off casseroles and warm cornbread, insisting that no mother-to-be should go hungry. At the clinic, a nurse named Carmen stayed late after shifts, talking Naomi through her fears and reminding her that she was not alone. Even at the legal aid office, her supervisor quietly adjusted her hours so she could attend evening classes once she was accepted. One evening, as she returned home carrying a stack of law textbooks from the library, Naomi paused at the threshold of her apartment. The air smelled faintly of lavender from Mrs. Thompson's sachets, and for the first time since she had left the Whitfield estate, the small, imperfect space felt like a sanctuary. She set down the books, placed a hand over her belly, and whispered, "We're going to be okay, more than okay. We're going to rise." And though the path ahead was long, the conviction in her voice made the walls themselves seem to hold the promise. As winter melted into spring, Naomi received her acceptance letter. She stood in her tiny kitchen clutching the envelope, tears of disbelief spilling down her cheeks as sunlight streamed across the floor. She had been chosen. She had been given the chance to build the life Evelyn had told her she could never have. She looked down at her growing belly, her heart swelling with fierce love. "This is our beginning," she whispered. From the ashes of a shattered marriage, a phoenix was rising stronger, brighter, and unstoppable. The storm came without warning. It was a humid July evening, and Naomi sat at her small desk beneath the glow of a flickering lamp, highlighting passages in a thick casebook. The city outside hummed with the sound of cicadas, and a gentle breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of exhaustion lectures, by day legal aid work by evening, and restless sleep broken by the steady flutter of two tiny lives inside her. But that night, as thunder rolled in the distance, a sharp pain cut through her like a blade. Naomi froze, her pen slipping from her fingers, the casebook sliding closed. At first she told herself it was nothing more than fatigue, another price of the path she had chosen. Yet when the second wave came fiercer than the first, her breath caught in a gasp. "No, not yet," she whispered, her hand flying to her belly. The twins weren't due for nearly 2 months. She had counted every week, carefully reminding herself that if she could only make it to 36 weeks, they would be safe. But nature did not wait for permission. Within the hour, Naomi was rushed to Emory Hospital, her heart pounding with terror. The fluorescent lights of the delivery ward blurred above her as nurses hurried alongside the gurney. She could hear their voices, steady, professional, but beneath the calm tones she detected urgency. "She's 31 weeks, one nurse said. "Both heartbeats are strong, but we need to prepare for a NICU transfer." Naomi's chest tightened. She had learned enough in her classes to know the risks: lungs, underdeveloped, fragile immune systems, endless complications waiting to pounce. The thought of her children fighting for each breath shattered her resolve, but she clung to the sound of their heartbeats, steady and brave through the monitor's rhythm. Hours blurred into a haze of pain, fear, and whispered prayers. At dawn, under the pale light of a new day, two cries pierced the silence. First Elijah, then Malik, their voices fragile yet defiant, as if announcing to the world they were here and they would not be silenced. Naomi sobbed as the nurses whisked them away, her arms aching with emptiness. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, "please take care of them." It was not until later that she was wheeled into the NICU, her body weak, her soul trembling. The room hummed with machines, the soft beeping of monitors keeping vigil over tiny lives. And there beneath the glow of sterile lights lay her sons. So small, so impossibly fragile, each tucked inside an incubator, their chests rising and falling with the help of gentle streams of oxygen. Naomi's breath caught as she pressed a trembling hand to the clear plastic wall of Elijah's incubator. His skin was delicate, his fingers no larger than the petals of a flower. Yet when they curled faintly around her fingertip, she felt a surge of love so fierce it eclipsed every fear. "Hi, my darling," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "It's Mama, I'm here." She moved to Malik, whose tiny chest rose and fell with quiet determination. "And you," she breathed softly, her voice breaking. "My brave boy, you've already stolen my heart." For hours she sat between them, whispering lullabies, telling them stories of the world waiting beyond those sterile walls. She promised them that no matter how small, no matter how fragile, they were not alone. The days that followed became a rhythm of vigil. Naomi spent her mornings at the hospital reading aloud from her casebooks so her boys would know her voice. In the afternoon, she rushed to her legal aid job, her body weary but her spirit unyielding. At night she studied until her vision blurred, whispering promises to her sons that she would one day build them a life far from fear. Her neighbors rallied around her. Mrs. Thompson sat with the twins when Naomi had to leave, knitting tiny hats to keep their fragile heads warm. Carmen, the nurse she had befriended months earlier, ensured Naomi always had updates, always had hope to cling to, even on the hardest nights. Yet still Naomi's heart ached for what should have been. She thought of Ryan sometimes in fleeting guilty moments, wondering if he ever sensed the two lives that bore his blood, fighting for their place in the world. But whenever the thought lingered too long, she remembered Evelyn's threat, the icy cruelty in her eyes, and she knew she could not look back. One evening as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Naomi stood by Elijah and Malik's incubators, her fingers resting gently against the glass. Both boys stirred faintly, their tiny movements filling her with hope. "You came too soon," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "But maybe that's because the world needs you sooner than it was ready. And I promise you, my loves, I will be strong enough. For both of you." In that fragile, sacred moment, Naomi realized that while her foundation had been shattered months before, she was now laying a new one, not from stone and timber, but from love and unshakable will. And though the road ahead was steep, she knew with certainty that her sons would not walk it alone. Two hearts had arrived too soon, and with them Naomi's second chance at life had begun. The rhythm of Naomi Carter's life became a symphony of exhaustion. By day she was a law student, her sharp mind absorbing every word of lectures, every nuance of case law. By evening she was an assistant at the legal aid office, filing briefs and typing motions, with a steadiness that belied the trembling in her hands. And always, she was a mother, her heart tethered to two tiny souls in the NICU, whose fragile breasts dictated the tempo of her existence. The days blurred into one another, marked not by sunrises and sunsets, but by the beeping of monitors, the rustle of textbooks, and the lullabies she whispered between hospital visits and study sessions. Every morning began before dawn. Naomi rose quietly, her hair pulled back, her body moving on sheer willpower rather than rest. She packed her worn leather bag with case books, a thermos of coffee, and the small notebook where she scribbled thoughts for the boys' letters she dreamed of reading to them when they were old enough to understand. The walk to the hospital was a prayer in motion. She would pause outside the NICU, pressing her palms together for courage, then step inside to find Elijah and Malik still so small, but fighting with a determination that mirrored her own. She would sit for an hour sometimes, two reading them passages from her studies, civil rights cases, constitutional law. Her voice, gentle and steady, wove a lullaby of justice and hope into the sterile hum of machines. Then with her heart aching, she would kiss the glass of their incubators and leave whispering, "Be brave, my loves. Mama will be back." Classes at Emory demanded every ounce of her focus. She sat near the front, her notes meticulous, her questions sharp. Some classmates admired her quiet brilliance. Others whispered about the exhausted young woman who slipped in just on time and disappeared before study groups began. Naomi did not mind the whispers. She had no time for their world of carefree nights and laughter in campus cafes. Her world was measured in ounces, gained oxygen levels, stabilized, and the soft weight of her books against her chest. Work at the legal aid office offered no reprieve. The cases were heavy: women seeking protection from violent husbands, mothers fighting for custody, families on the brink of losing their homes. Naomi absorbed their pain with an empathy that surprised even her. She listened, she comforted, and though she had no law degree yet, her words already carried the weight of an advocate. Often when the office grew quiet, she would look at the faces of the women who came in, bruised, broken, desperate for hope. She saw herself in them, and each time she whispered inwardly, "One day I will stand for you. One day I will fight with every ounce of my strength." Evenings stretched long into the night. After work, she returned to the NICU, her body weary, but her spirit unwilling to stay away. She would rest her head against the clear walls of Elijah and Malik's incubators, humming softly, telling them of the life she was building, the little apartment they would soon call home, the future she was stitching together, thread by fragile thread. On the hardest nights when exhaustion threatened to swallow her whole, Naomi would return to her apartment, collapse into the single armchair by the window, and weep silently into her hands. The walls felt too close, the shadows too heavy, the silence too loud. But then she would remember the feel of Elijah's tiny fingers curling around hers, Malik's determined breaths filling the monitor's rhythm, and she would rise again. Her neighbors became her lifeline. Mrs. Thompson left soups by her door with notes written in shaky script. For strength, my dear. Carmen called every evening she couldn't be at the NICU, whispering updates about the boy's progress. The community that had gathered around her stitched itself into the fabric of her survival, reminding her she was not alone, even when loneliness tried to convince her otherwise. Weeks turned to months, and slowly, miracle by miracle, her sons grew stronger. The day Elijah no longer needed oxygen, Naomi nearly collapsed with relief. When Malik gained enough weight to leave the incubator, she wept into her hands, laughter and tears mingling until her shoulders shook. At last the day came, when the doctor smiled and said the words she had prayed for, "They're ready to go home." Naomi stood in the doorway of the NICU, cradling both boys in her arms. They were still small, still fragile, but they were hers, living proof that miracles existed. As she pressed her cheek against the downy softness of their hair, she whispered, "We did it, my loves. We made it through." That night back in her apartment, Naomi laid Elijah and Malik in the small crib she had pieced together with the help of neighbors. The room was quiet except for their soft breathing, and as she watched them sleep, a sense of peace settled over her. The struggle was far from over. There would be more long nights, more classes, more battles. But for the first time, she felt not only the weight of her fight, but also its triumph. She had survived the grind. She had carried them through the storm. And as she lay beside their cribs, exhaustion finally giving way to rest, Naomi knew the foundation of their lives was no longer broken. It was being rebuilt stronger, fiercer, and unshakable. The years unfurled like pages in a book Naomi Carter had once been too weary to believe she would live to see. Her sons Elijah and Malik grew from fragile newborns in the NICU into lively, curious boys whose laughter filled the small apartment with warmth. Their cribs had long since been replaced by bunk beds, their baby clothes by school uniforms, but every night Naomi still lingered at their bedside, brushing her fingers gently through their hair, remembering the terrifying days when she had feared she might never bring them home. Elijah the elder by 4 minutes carried a quiet intensity. He devoured books as though each held the secret of the world, his questions often tumbling faster than Naomi could answer. Malik, on the other hand, was bold, mischievous, and endlessly charismatic. He had a grin that could charm even the sternest teacher and a spirit as uncontainable as the wind. Together, they were her light. Her days remained relentless, juggling cases at her growing law firm, preparing for the court battles that now defined her career, attending every parent-teacher meeting, every school performance, every scraped knee, and whispered fear in the night. But no matter how late she returned, the boys always knew she would be there. It was a Saturday morning in early spring when the question Naomi had been quietly dreading finally came. They had spread a blanket in Piedmont Park, the grass still damp with morning dew, and the twins, now 10 years old, were playing chess beneath the wide branches of an old oak. Naomi watched them with pride, the golden sunlight gilding their curls, when Elijah suddenly set down a pawn and turned toward her. "Mama," he asked softly, "where's our dad?" Naomi's chest tightened. The question had hovered unspoken for years, lingering in their curious glances whenever classmates mentioned fathers at school. She had known the day would come, and yet her heart still faltered beneath its weight. Malik leaned forward, his eyes wide, echoing his brother's curiosity. "Yeah, everybody else's dad comes to games and picks them up from school. Did our dad not want us?" Naomi's breath caught the pain of Evelyn's cruel words, and Ryan's silence flashing like ghosts before her eyes. She steadied herself, smoothing Malik's curls with trembling fingers. "Your dad." She paused, searching for words that would not wound. "Your dad made choices a long time ago. Choices that weren't about you. Not because you weren't wanted, not because you weren't loved, but because he didn't know how to be the man we needed. Elijah's brow furrowed, so he left you. Naomi swallowed hard. Yes, he left us. But you must understand his leaving doesn't define you. You are not less because of what he chose. Malek's voice was quiet. Then why do we look like him? The question pierced her heart. She reached for both their hands, holding them tightly. Because you are his by blood, but you are mine by love. And love, she whispered, her eyes shining with fierce conviction, is stronger than anything else. For a long moment, neither boy spoke. Then Elijah leaned against her shoulder, his small body warm and steady. Malik, always the bolder one, rested his chin on her lap and whispered, "We don't need him, right?" Naomi kissed the crown of his head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "No, my loves, we don't need him. We are enough." From that day forward, Naomi noticed a shift. The boys carried themselves taller, as though her words had planted something inside them, seeds of pride, of resilience, of greatness yet to come. At school, Elijah's teachers marveled at his brilliance. He solved math problems faster than most adults, his essays weaving words with a maturity beyond his years. Malik thrived on the stage, his energy magnetic, his voice carrying with it a natural charisma that drew people to him. They were different, yet together they were unstoppable. Naomi often watched them with quiet awe. She had feared once that growing without a father would leave an emptiness she could never fill. But instead, she saw two boys blooming in the light of love, their roots entwined with hers, in soil made richer by struggle. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, Elijah working through algebra, while Malik sketched superheroes in the margins of his notebook, Elijah looked up and said, "Mama, do you think we could be anything we want to be?" Naomi smiled softly, her chest swelling with pride. Anything, she promised. The world may not always make it easy, but with heart, with courage, and with the strength you already have, you can be more than anything I ever dreamed. And as she spoke, she knew she wasn't just giving them hope. She was telling them the truth. Because the seeds had been planted and she could already see the greatness they were destined to grow into. The courtroom had always felt to Naomi Carter like a cathedral of truth, its vaulted ceilings and solemn silence demanding reverence, its very air heavy with the weight of human lives waiting for justice. And now, as she stood at the polished oak table, papers spread before her, Naomi felt not fear, but purpose thrumming in her veins. Years had passed since the days she whispered case law to her sons in the NICU. Elijah and Malik were older now, strong and radiant, with the fire she had nurtured in them, and Naomi herself had transformed. No longer the weary student cradling textbooks with trembling hands, she was a woman fully in her power, a lawyer known for her unyielding resolve and the fierce compassion she carried into every battle. Her first cases had been modest custody hearings, restraining orders, small family disputes. But word spread quickly of the attorney who did not just argue but believed, who treated each client not as a case number, but as a life worth fighting for. She became known as the advocate for women who had been silenced, for children forgotten in the shadows of bitter divorces, for families clinging to hope. That morning, Naomi stood across from a man twice her size, his voice rough with anger as he denied the bruises photographed on his wife's arms. The woman sat trembling at Naomi's side, her eyes flickering with fear each time her husband spoke. Naomi placed a steadying hand over hers, leaning close enough to whisper, "You are safe now, I promise." Then she rose, her presence commanding the room. Her words were not loud, but every syllable was infused with conviction. She painted a picture of a woman who had endured years of cruelty, whose silence had been broken only when she could no longer bear the weight alone. She spoke of children hiding in closets, of nights filled with fear, of hope that justice might finally shield them. By the time Naomi rested her case, the courtroom was silent, but for the quiet weeping of her client. The judge's ruling came swift and decisive, protection granted, custody awarded. As the woman clung to Naomi outside the courtroom, whispering a tearful thank you, Naomi felt the weight of her own journey pressing close. She remembered Evelyn's sneer, Ryan's silence, the night she had been left with nothing but a broken heart, and two fragile lives inside her. And she realized every battle she fought now was not just for her clients, but for the woman she had once been. The victories multiplied. Naomi's reputation grew until her name was spoken with respect and in some circles with fear. She opened her own practice, a modest firm that quickly became a beacon for those who had nowhere else to turn. She decorated its walls not with degrees or awards, though she had many, but with photographs of her sons, reminders of why she fought. At home, Elijah and Malik watched their mother with awe. They had grown into bright, confident boys, each carrying a piece of her strength within them. Elijah often asked about her cases, hungry for the details, his mind already tilting toward justice. Malik teased her about her superhero cape, insisting she didn't need one because her words alone could save people. On late nights when she returned home weary from long trials, Naomi would find them waiting up for her. They would crowd around the kitchen table, demanding to know if she had won their eyes alight with pride. And in those moments, Naomi felt that all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, all the scars she bore had been worth it. Yet there were quiet moments, too, when her gaze lingered on their faces, and she wondered how long she could keep their questions about their father at bay. They were growing older, more aware. Sometimes when Malik's laughter echoed in a certain way, or when Elijah's jaw set in stubborn determination, Naomi saw Ryan in them. It was a reminder, both tender and cruel tender, because her sons carried the best of their father, cruel, because they carried a man who had chosen absence over love. Still, she refused to let the shadow of Ryan Whitfield darken the brilliance of her son's future. She poured herself into their growth, into their joy, into the belief that they were destined for greatness. And so Naomi Carter rose not from privilege or ease, but from ashes. Once she had been broken by the cruelty of a mother-in-law and the betrayal of a husband. Now she was a warrior in the truest sense, not with armor and sword, but with truth, compassion, and a voice that could not be silenced. As she stood in her office one evening, the city lights of Atlanta glittering beyond the window, Naomi allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought of the girl who had once wept in an empty house, believing her life was over. She thought of the fragile newborns who had fit in the palms of her hands, and the fierce boys who now filled her home with laughter. And she thought of herself no longer the abandoned, broken wife, but the woman who had turned her wounds into weapons, her grief into grace. The world had tried to shatter Naomi Carter, but instead it had forged her into steel. The once proud name of Ryan Whitfield had begun to fade, whispered in half tones through the circles of Atlanta society where it had once commanded respect. Years ago, Ryan had stood at the pinnacle of promise, an architect with a vision, heir to a family name, gilded by wealth and reputation. But now, as he sat alone in his office with its echoing emptiness, the blueprints scattered across his desk seemed less like dreams and more like relics of a man who had lost his way. The decline had not been sudden. It had crept upon him like ivy climbing the walls of a forgotten house, slowly, inexorably, until he could no longer see the sunlight through the weight of its growth. The firm his father had built struggled to stay afloat in a changing market, while Ryan himself found his decisions, second-guessed, his creativity stifled beneath the heavy hand of his mother Evelyn. It had been Evelyn, of course, who had urged him to remarry. Charlotte Langston is the key. She had declared, her tone more command than suggestion. Charlotte, the daughter of a banking magnate, was poised, proper and wealthy, an ideal match. Evelyn insisted to restore the Whitfield standing. But Ryan's heart had not stirred at the thought of her. It had not stirred for anyone since Naomi. Naomi. Her name haunted him like the echo of a song once loved and lost. At night, when whiskey dulled the edges of his thoughts, he would close his eyes and see her the way her laughter had once filled their home. The softness of her hand resting against his cheek, the way her eyes had looked the night he broke her heart. He could still feel the sting of his own hand against her skin, the silence that had followed, and the way she had walked away without looking back. He told himself he had done what he must, that Evelyn had been right, that Naomi, unable to give him children, could never have given him the life he was meant to lead. But the lie never settled comfortably, and now in the silence of his solitude it strangled him. One evening, as he sat in the dim light of his study, the television flickered with the evening news. He wasn't watching until a familiar name caught his ear. Attorney Naomi Carter, widely praised for her groundbreaking work defending women and children in family court, has once again secured a landmark ruling. Ryan's glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the hardwood. He stared at the screen as her face appeared radiant and strong, her eyes burning with the fire he remembered so well. She spoke with the same grace she had once used in their late-night conversations, the same conviction that had first drawn him to her. For a moment, Ryan could not breathe. She was everything Evelyn had once dismissed, everything he had let go, and now she stood before the world as proof of her worth. The camera shifted, and behind Naomi, two boys darted into the frame, laughing as they tugged at her hands. They were tall for their age, their hair rich with curls, their smiles bright. But it wasn't their energy that sent Ryan's heart crashing to the floor. It was their faces so achingly familiar. His sons. Though the news anchor moved on, Ryan remained frozen, staring at the blank screen long after her image had faded. He could not deny the truth. Those boys carried his blood, his eyes, his very smile. God, he whispered, pressing his hands to his face. That night he did not sleep. Memories flooded him, Naomi's soft laughter the last time they had made love, the look in her eyes when she had whispered that love was enough. He had turned his back on her, on them, and in doing so he had turned his back on himself. In the days that followed, Ryan tried to bury himself in work, but every blueprint blurred into Naomi's face. Every child he passed on the street reminded him of what he had lost. Even Charlotte's delicate laughter grated against him, a poor echo of the warmth he once knew. Evelyn noticed, of course. She always did. "You've been distracted," she remarked coolly one evening at dinner, her eyes sharp as glass. "This marriage with Charlotte is essential. Do not ruin it." Ryan set down his fork, his jaw tightening. For the first time, he met her gaze with a flicker of defiance. "What if I already have?" Evelyn's lips thinned, her voice lowering to a hiss. "You gave Naomi up for a reason. Do not forget it." But the truth was, Ryan could never forget. The ghost of Naomi walked with him everywhere. In the silence of the night, in the laughter of children, in the hollow echo of his own choices. And now, with two bright-eyed boys carrying her light and his blood visible to the world, the ghost had become something far more dangerous. She was no longer a memory. She was a living truth. And Ryan knew with a weight that pressed against his chest that one day soon, their worlds would collide again. He often sat alone in his penthouse apartment, its glittering view of the Atlanta skyline, doing little to soften the hollow ache that had taken root in his chest. Whiskey had become his closest companion, amber pools, reflecting a life unraveling thread by thread. He told himself he was working, told Charlotte he was simply tired from long hours at the firm, but in truth he was haunted by Naomi. Her face lingered in his mind like the afterglow of a flame. He saw her in the most unexpected places, in the quiet grace of a woman passing on the street, in the laugh of a child echoing through the park, in the scent of jasmine that once drifted through the halls of their shared home. And each time the memory cut deeper, a whisper of the life he had cast aside. It wasn't only the news broadcast that had shattered his defenses. Since then, Ryan had begun hearing her name everywhere. Naomi Carter, the attorney making waves across the city. Naomi Carter, the voice of women who had none the champion for children whose cries had long gone unheard. Articles appeared in magazines he once dismissed, her photograph commanding the page with poise and quiet power. She was no longer just the woman he had abandoned. She was a force, and always by her side those boys, Elijah and Malik, his sons. The first time he allowed himself to say the words aloud, his throat tightened. My sons. The sound was foreign, bitter, yet achingly sweet. He had missed their first steps, their first words, their laughter, their tears. He had missed everything. One night, unable to bear the silence, he searched her name on his laptop. Images filled the screen: Naomi at charity galas, Naomi leaving the courthouse in a tailored suit, Naomi with her arms around two bright-eyed boys at a school event. Ryan leaned closer, tracing the outline of Elijah's smile with his fingertip on the screen, the same smile he himself had worn in his youth. Malik's eyes were his sharp and mischievous a mirror of the boy Ryan once had been before the weight of expectation hardened him. He closed the laptop quickly, ashamed of the tears burning in his eyes. He told himself he had no right to them, yet the whispers of the past would not let him rest. It was Charlotte who first noticed the change. "You're distant," she said one evening, her voice measured though her eyes betrayed unease. Ryan forced a smile, reaching for her hand across the dinner table. "Just tired." But she withdrew gently, her gaze sharp. "It's more than that. You think I don't notice, but I do. Whoever she is, she's still with you." Ryan's hand stilled. He could not deny it. The ghost of Naomi was with him, always, her presence heavier than Charlotte's warmth could ever be. Later that night, as Charlotte slept beside him, Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories unfurled: Naomi's laughter in their kitchen, her head resting against his shoulder on late evenings, the way her voice had cracked when she whispered that love was the point. He remembered the fear in her eyes the night he had struck her, the moment her trust had shattered beyond repair. Shame coiled through him, cold and unrelenting. He had been weak, too weak to protect her from Evelyn, too weak to choose her when she needed him most. And now the consequences of his cowardice were living reminders, walking the world with his eyes, his smile, his blood. The whispers became unbearable. He found himself driving past Emory Law's campus one afternoon, though he had no reason to be there. Later, he lingered near the courthouse where she often worked, watching from his car as Naomi emerged, her sons at her side. She looked radiant, her laughter carrying through the crisp air as Elijah proudly handed her a drawing from school, and Malik leapt to tell her a story. Ryan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a moment, he imagined stepping out, calling her name, watching her turn toward him. But fear pinned him in place. What could he offer her now? Apologies forged too late. A father's presence that had been absent for a decade. As he drove away, the whispers followed. She deserved better. They deserved you. You failed them. At dinner with Evelyn the following week, he barely touched his food. Evelyn prattled on about Charlotte's family, about the importance of appearances, about restoring the Whitfield name. Ryan finally interrupted, his voice quiet but edged with something she had not heard in years. "Do you ever regret it?" Evelyn blinked. "Regret what?" "Naomi," he said. The name alone made Evelyn's lips tighten into a line of distaste. "She was a mistake," Evelyn said briskly. "A distraction. I told you from the beginning she would never give you what you needed. And I was right." Ryan leaned back, his gaze steady. "And yet, she's everything you said she could never be. Everything." For the first time, Evelyn faltered, a flicker of unease shadowing her eyes. But Ryan said nothing more. He simply rose from the table, leaving her to her carefully arranged empire, and walked into the night with the whispers of the past louder than ever. He knew deep down the ghosts would not rest until he faced them, until he faced her. The Langston estate glittered that evening, every chandelier burning like a crown of fire above the assembled guests. The ballroom was filled with Atlanta's finest bankers and lawyers, heirs and heiresses, each face polished, each smile rehearsed. Crystal glasses, clinked violins played softly in the corner, and every detail was staged to perfection, as though love itself could be arranged like flowers in a vase. But for Ryan Whitfield, standing beside Charlotte Langston with a diamond ring heavy in his pocket, the evening felt less like a celebration and more like a sentence. Charlotte looked beautiful. She always did. Her gown shimmered silver beneath the candlelight, her posture poised with the effortless grace of a woman born into a world where beauty and wealth were expected. She smiled as the guests congratulated them, her laughter ringing clear, but Ryan noticed the faint tremor in her hand when it brushed against his. She was no fool. She knew his heart wasn't hers. Evelyn stood nearby, watching with the satisfaction of a general surveying a conquered battlefield. Her eyes flicked between Ryan and Charlotte with approval, her lips curving into a smile that never reached her eyes. "It's the perfect match," she had said earlier that week, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Charlotte will stabilize the firm, restore our place. You owe this to your father's legacy." But in the quiet of his soul, Ryan knew it wasn't his father's legacy he was chasing. It was his mother's ambition, and it had cost him everything that had ever truly mattered. When Charlotte excused herself to greet a guest, Ryan stepped out onto the terrace, desperate for air. The night was warm, the garden below bathed in moonlight, and for a moment he allowed himself to breathe. He thought of Naomi, her laughter, her fierce eyes, the way her hand had once fit perfectly into his. He imagined her now not as the woman who had walked away shattered, but as the one he had seen on the news, radiant, unbreakable, flanked by two boys who carried his blood. "My sons," he whispered into the night. The words felt foreign on his tongue, heavy with regret. Behind him, Evelyn's voice broke the silence. "Don't you dare ruin this." Ryan turned slowly. She stood framed by the golden light of the ballroom, her expression sharp. "You think I don't see it?" She continued, her voice low-cutting. "The way you look away when she's mentioned. The nights you can't sleep. I know you, Ryan. And I know she still haunts you. But Naomi Carter is nothing to you now. Do you understand? Nothing?" His jaw tightened. "She's the mother of my children." For a moment, Evelyn's composure faltered. Her eyes narrowed. "You have no proof of that." "I don't need proof," Ryan said, his voice quiet but steady. "I see it every time I look at them. They're mine. And you knew it. You knew, and you kept it from me." Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line, but she did not deny it. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice like silk hiding steel. "You think she'd take you back after what you did, after the life she built without you? She doesn't need you, Ryan. She never will. All you'll do is destroy her again." He turned away, gripping the railing until his knuckles whitened. Evelyn's words struck true because he feared them. He feared Naomi's eyes hardening when she saw him, feared his sons turning away in disappointment. But even fear could not quench the longing. Back inside, Charlotte approached him, her smile gentle, almost apologetic. "They're waiting for us," she said softly, slipping her hand into his arm. For a moment he saw in her eyes the truth. They were both trapped actors in a play neither had chosen, but both had agreed to perform. As the applause rang out when he slipped the diamond ring onto Charlotte's finger, Ryan forced a smile. Cameras flashed, guests cheered, and Evelyn's triumphant gaze swept over the room. But inside, Ryan felt nothing. The ring on Charlotte's hand glittered beneath the chandeliers, a symbol not of love, but of duty. And though he stood beside his bride-to-be, Ryan's heart was already elsewhere, lost in the memory of a woman he had broken and the children he had never known. Across the city, Naomi Carter was tucking Elijah and Malik into bed. Malik giggled as he tried to finish telling a story before sleep claimed him, while Elijah whispered a goodnight prayer. Naomi brushed a kiss across both their foreheads, smiling softly as she turned off the light. Later, as she settled with a case file at her desk, her phone lit up with a news notification. She froze as she read the headline. "Whitfield Langston engagement announced at lavish gala." Her heart stilled the world, narrowing to that single line. She clicked the article, and there he was, Ryan in a crisp tuxedo, smiling for the cameras beside Charlotte Langston. The same man who had turned his back on her, the father her son still longed to know. Naomi's hand trembled as she closed the phone. She stared out the window into the dark, her reflection staring back at her, steady but shaken. She whispered softly into the silence, "So this is the life you chose." And though her heart ached, she felt the fire within her spark again. If Ryan believed he could erase the past so easily, he was wrong. The reckoning she had long held back was no longer a distant shadow. It was coming. The Langston Cathedral stood gleaming under the midday sun, its white stone spires stretching heavenward, as though begging for grace upon the spectacle about to unfold. Guests filled the pews, a sea of silks and diamonds, the air thick with perfume and whispered anticipation. The union of Ryan Whitfield and Charlotte Langston was not merely a wedding, it was a merger of legacies, a spectacle designed to restore the Whitfield name and elevate the Langstons' influence. Ryan stood at the altar, his tuxedo flawless, his jaw set with the resolve of a man playing the role assigned to him. Charlotte approached down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like moonlight, her smile delicate, her steps measured. Applause rippled softly as she drew near. Yet Ryan's gaze faltered, sweeping the crowd with restless unease. The ghosts of his past still clung to him. Naomi's face lingered at the edge of every thought. And then, like the shifting of a storm, the great doors opened again. Heads turned, murmurs rippled, and there she was, Naomi Carter. She stepped into the cathedral with the grace of a queen, her gown a deep sapphire that seemed to drink in the light, her hair framing her face like a crown. On either side of her, Elijah and Malik walked tall, their dark eyes alight with curiosity and strength. The congregation gasped, whispers rising in waves as she advanced down the aisle, uninvited yet unstoppable. Ryan's breath caught. His heart pounded as if the earth itself had tilted beneath him. He had dreamed of her return, feared it, longed for it, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of her, now radiant and unbreakable, their sons at her side. Charlotte's smile faltered, her hand tightening on her bouquet. Evelyn, seated in the front row, stiffened her fingers, curling into white-knuckled fists, the perfect veneer of her composure cracking for the first time. Naomi's voice rang out calm and steady, carrying through the vaulted ceiling like a hymn. "I object." Gasps filled the air. The minister froze, his hands trembling on the open Bible. All eyes turned toward her, waiting for the storm to break. Naomi stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Ryan. "You stand here ready to vow yourself to another woman," she said, her voice trembling with power. "Yet you have never answered for the vows you already broke. You have never faced the children you abandoned." A stunned silence followed. Elijah and Malik stood tall at her sides, their resemblance to Ryan undeniable, their presence, a living truth no one could refute. Ryan's lips parted, his breath shallow. "Naomi." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but her voice did not waver. 10 years, Ryan. 10 years I raised them alone. 10 years they asked about their father. And where were you, hiding behind your mother's pride? Pretending we never existed. Evelyn rose sharply, her voice sharp as glass. "This is an outrage, remove her at once." But Naomi turned her gaze upon the matriarch, her tone like steel. "No, Evelyn, not this time. You silenced me once. You broke me. You told me I was nothing. But look at me now." She spread her arm gently toward Elijah and Malik. "Look at them. Does this look like nothing to you?" The crowd shifted, whispers swelling into judgmental stares, aimed at Evelyn, at Ryan, at the spectacle unraveling before them. Charlotte's bouquet trembled in her grip, her face pale, caught between shame and fury. Ryan stepped forward, his eyes on Naomi, then on the boys. For the first time in years, tears brimmed in his eyes. "Elijah, Malik," his voice broke. "My sons." Elijah stiffened, his young jaw tightening. Malik tilted his head, curiosity in his eyes, but no warmth. They said nothing. Naomi's chin lifted, her gaze unwavering. "Don't call them that now. You lost the right when you walked away." The words struck him harder than any blow. He staggered back, the weight of his choices crushing him. The room, once filled with admiration, now brimmed with scandal. The Langstons whispered furiously, Charlotte's mother glaring daggers, while Evelyn's empire of control threatened to collapse in a single moment of truth. Naomi took her son's hands, her voice soft but firm. "Come, boys, we have no place here." And with that, she turned, her sapphire gown sweeping down the aisle like a banner of victory. Elijah and Malik walked beside her, their heads high, their presence defiant. Ryan watched them go, his heart breaking open with the rawness of regret. He wanted to call out, to run after them, to beg for a chance at redemption. But as Naomi's figure receded into the light beyond the cathedral doors, he knew this reckoning had only begun. The applause that had greeted Charlotte's entrance was gone. In its place lingered only whispers and the ruins of a wedding that had never truly begun. Do you want me to continue immediately with part 14? The collapse of Ryan Whitfield, where the aftermath of Naomi's revelation tears apart the life Ryan and Evelyn tried to preserve. The grandeur of the Langston Cathedral dissolved into chaos after Naomi's departure. Guests whispered furiously behind manicured hands, the scandal already racing beyond those marble walls into the veins of Atlanta society. The Langston family, their prestige tarnished, swept Charlotte away in a storm of silken skirts and trembling fury, and Ryan Whitfield was left standing in the ruins of a life carefully staged, but never truly his. The following days unfolded like a slow unraveling. Calls from the Langstons went unanswered. The engagement was quietly dissolved, the official statement citing irreconcilable differences. But the truth needed no explanation. The city had already chosen its story. Ryan Whitfield, the man once destined for brilliance, had been publicly unmasked as a coward who abandoned his wife and children. At the firm, whispers followed him through the halls. Longtime clients withdrew, unwilling to tie their reputations to his. New contracts evaporated before they could be signed. His employees averted their eyes, offering polite smiles that carried more pity than respect. The office, once buzzing with ambition, became a tomb of silence. It was Evelyn who tried to hold the pieces together. She marched into boardrooms with her chin high, her voice steady, insisting the scandal would fade, that Ryan remained the rightful heir to his father's legacy. But for the first time, her power faltered. The society she had once commanded with an iron fist now looked at her with suspicion, her veneer of control cracking under the weight of public disgrace. Ryan, however, could not summon even the energy to fight. Nights blurred into days as he sat in the quiet of his penthouse, the city lights spilling through the glass like indifferent stars. He stared at the photographs that now haunted every news article: Naomi in her sapphire gown, Elijah and Malik at her side, their resemblance to him undeniable. His sons. The word gnawed at him, each syllable a wound. He thought of the years he had missed their first steps, their first words, birthdays, lit with candles he had never blown out with them. He wondered if Elijah liked chess, if Malik still carried the mischievous spark he had glimpsed at the wedding. He wondered if they hated him. The whiskey bottles piled high on his kitchen counter gave no answers, only temporary silence. But in the morning, the truth was always waiting. One evening, Ryan finally broke the silence with Evelyn. She sat across from him in his study, her pearls gleaming like armor, her expression as sharp as ever. "You have to face this," he said quietly, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. "You lied to me. You kept them from me." Evelyn's gaze hardened. "I protected you. That woman would have dragged you down. She was never fit to stand beside you." "She was my wife," Ryan whispered, his voice cracking. "And those are my children. You kept them from me." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice cold as ice. "Do not speak as though you would have chosen differently. You left her. You struck her. You let her walk away. You are the one who broke it. Ryan, not me." The words cut deeper because they were true. For all his mother's manipulations, the final betrayal had been his. He had chosen silence. He had chosen pride. And now he had lost everything. The following week, he drove past Naomi's law office. He parked across the street, hidden behind tinted windows, and watched her through the glass. She emerged in a tailored suit, her sons flanking her, their laughter spilling into the evening air. She looked untouchable, radiant, complete. Ryan's chest ached with longing. He wanted to step out to call her name, to beg for forgiveness. But he knew the look she would give him, the same look she had given in the cathedral when she told him he had lost the right to call them his sons. That night, Ryan returned to his empty apartment and sat in the dark. The silence pressed in on him, heavy and merciless. He pressed his hands over his face, whispering into the emptiness, "Naomi, my boys, I'm so sorry." For the first time in his life, Ryan Whitfield wept without restraint, the sound of a man crumbling under the weight of his own ruin. The collapse of Ryan Whitfield was not a spectacle for the city to watch. It was quiet, private, the breaking of a man who had once been gilded in promise, but had chosen cowardice over courage. And as he sat there shattered in the dark, he knew this was only the beginning. Naomi had walked away with her head high, her son's hands in hers, her dignity intact. He had been left with nothing but ghosts and the knowledge that he had created them himself. The morning sunlight spilled across Naomi Carter's living room, golden and warm, painting the walls with the soft promise of renewal. The city beyond her window stirred with life, but inside the world felt still serene, a rare pause in the whirlwind that had defined so much of her journey. Elijah and Malik sat at the kitchen table, their heads bent together as they argued cheerfully over a chess game. Their laughter filled the space, the sound as bright as the sun itself. Naomi stood in the doorway, watching them, her heart swelling with a pride that words could never capture. 10 years ago, she had stood alone, broken, stripped of the life she thought she could not live without. Today she stood stronger than she had ever dreamed possible, surrounded by the two souls who had transformed her sorrow into strength. The memory of Ryan's face at the wedding lingered, still the shock in his eyes when he saw his sons, the anguish in his voice when he whispered their names. Naomi had carried that moment with her, not as a wound, but as a reminder she had survived the very worst, and from the ashes she had built a life of beauty and resilience. She had not forgiven him, not yet, perhaps not ever. But forgiveness, she realized, was not the key she needed to move forward. She had already freed herself the moment she chose to rise. Later that afternoon, the three of them walked through Piedmont Park, the air fragrant with magnolias in bloom. Elijah, thoughtful as ever, asked Mama, "Do you think we'll ever see him again?" Naomi looked down at her sons, their eyes reflecting both hope and hesitation. She took their hands in hers, the warmth of their palms grounding her. "One day if you choose to," she answered softly. "The decision will be yours. But no matter what happens, you will never walk alone. You have me. Always." Malik squeezed her hand with a grin. "That's all we need." Naomi smiled, her eyes stinging with tears. "That's all we'll ever need." As the sun dipped low, casting the park in hues of rose and gold, Naomi realized she was no longer haunted by the shadows of her past. The road ahead was wide and unwritten, but she was ready. Not because she had been spared from heartbreak, but because she had endured it and emerged whole. The woman who had once been cast aside as broken now stood as a beacon of strength, her sons beside her, her heart unshakable. Together they would face whatever the future held, not with fear, but with grace, courage, and love. Naomi Carter's story was no longer one of loss. It was a testament to resilience, to the power of love that refused to be silenced, to the beauty that could rise even from the deepest ruins. And as she held her boys close beneath the fading light of day, she whispered a truth she had carried for years, one she now believed with all her soul. This is our new dawn. If Naomi's journey has touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments. What part of her story spoke to you most deeply? Don't forget to like and follow so you'll never miss the next story of love, resilience, and the triumph of the human spirit. Together, let's keep these stories alive.